Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to an EA Zoom meeting presentation by myself, SΥmON. And today we're going to be talking about Pluto in Sagittarius and Uranus in Aquarius and Neptune in Aquarius, or at least the world that we exist in post these transits. And this is part 2 of Beyond the Horizons presentation that I've started. And really, this is actually just a continuation of the story that seems to be unfolding in huge ways. It originally actually started with the EA Zoom meeting that's called Saturn and Uranus, the Path to Individuation, which contains a lot of the message that I'm trying to bring through, not specifically for myself, but just in terms of my intention, which is to, in a sense, help process the collective and individually the nature of what reality is actually doing at this point in time, and maybe help us along the way just digest some of what type of energy is taking place and why we are moving in the direction that we're moving in, and how we can, I suppose, take best hold of the ability to embody this energy at the moment. And that's a really key word in understanding this whole entire process, is the embodiment of the energy. So the Saturn-Uranus video on the EA Zoom meetings is a really good video to watch as a part of what I'm sharing today, just as a continuation. And then, of course, Beyond the Horizons, part 1, where I talk a lot about the nature of technology coming onto the planet and how that is deeply connected to Neptune and Uranus's movement through Aquarius, and how that accelerated our evolutionary development. In EA, Uranus correlates to the nature of acceleration, and it quantifies everything, essentially. So wherever we're looking at Uranus in the charts, in your own personal life, and of course as a collective, this is where all of the sort of crystallized paradigms of thinking and values and traditions will be, in a sense, pressured to break down, and for us to initiate new ways of thinking, relative to new insights, relative to new innovative thinking patterns. So with Neptune and Uranus moving through Aquarius, what that brought for us, like I said, was our ability to, or as a human race, when I talk about us, I'm talking about the collective and the way that we experience the collective consciousness, and how what I would consider to be mutation, the nature of how our DNA mutates in accordance with celestial events. So with Neptune and Uranus being transpersonal planets, the nature of this energy has a lot to do with us being affected at a global level. Individually, of course, it affects our own personal story, but this is definitely something that we experience at a global level as well. So as I was talking about, when you look at Uranus and Neptune moving through Aquarius, firstly, Uranus will go through its own sign. And we know that anything that's going to go through its own sign is going to feel at home. It's going to feel like an amplification of energy that's materializing itself. So, with Uranus going through Aquarius, you could see that, we had these mobile telephones that were, super brick-like shaped, and the screens were, green and black. And by 2007, Steve Jobs, who was a Pluto in the 11th house, brought through innovative technology that completely revolutionized the way that we interface with each other and with ourselves. And it's not a coincidence that this type of awareness was being integrated into the collective while these planetary energies were moving through these signs. I know that Uranus was in Pisces actually in 2006, so it's not necessarily that this energy was directly because of Uranus in Aquarius. Pisces has a lot to do with the nature of how you touch the iPhone, and our fingers being sensitive. Pisces, how we would essentially have this touchpad that would come into play. But you look at the things like Facebook as an example. You just have to study the context of what Facebook is and how it has unified the collective through people just connecting to their extended family, Uranus, Aquarius correlating to extended, people and extended family. So a lot of that progression was taking place with these energies. And of course, with Neptune moving through these signs as well, this would just correlate not only to the south node of Neptune being activated, and this bringing to us the onset of the Aquarius age, as Jeffrey talks about with the Pluto in Leos. And you just need to look around you to see that, what he was referencing at the time was that Pluto transiting through Leo and giving birth to a lot of well, not a lot, but all of the Pluto Leos, that your polarity point is Aquarius. And here you are right now in your life in which you are actually witnessing the integration of the accelerated human being, or the next phase in our evolutionary development. And, I'm just recapping a little bit here as well. If we look at the context of how the brain is beginning to function, Uranus, Aquarius is all about the brain and how this operates. And the brain and the perception, the way that we take in things, the way that we're orientating our way of looking at life has become a lot more quantum than, say, for instance, in 1995. I mean, you just have to look at the reflection of what we have invented in terms of personal computing, the Mac and the PC. There are these things called CPUs, right? And these CPUs are like, they're processing units. Now, in 1995, you would have a processing unit that could only process 2 threads at a time. Whereas today, the technology that's available can process up to 32 threads. Now, when you're talking about a thread, you're talking about channels of awareness. You just have to look at the context of technology available right now and see that we are existing in a multidimensional reality. And the thing that I wanted to bring across in the previous video, if you have watched it, was that our bodies are interfacing with this new revolutionary, innovative state of awareness. And our brains are being mutated literally as we're interfaced with this. I mean, for most of you that are born, sort of in Pluto Libra, Pluto Virgo, Pluto Leo, interacting with a new smartphone was something that you had to get used to. You had to essentially create new dendrites within your brain and create new neuroplasticity in your brain in order to understand the functioning of what this technology was about. Whereas if you're Pluto and Scorpio generation soul, I mean, you were literally born into this world in which you were using technology at such a young age. The need for mutation within yourself wasn't as intense as, say, for instance, somebody like somebody born in 1975. It doesn't mean that you're incapable of doing it. It's just that the context of your biology had to begin mutating along with this new energy. So we've definitely come across a way of living that is uniquely different to, say, for instance, how we were living in 1995. And we've accelerated a tremendous amount. Now, one of the things that's important to understand about what I'm sharing here today and how this is something that it's not new information. You're not sitting here going like, I'm definitely not standing here and saying, oh, I know the way, or there's something unique that I've seen. I'm more wanting to hold space for us to acknowledge a dialogue that needs to happen at some point in your life around the context of this reality that's taking place, and watching this process unfold and how you interact with it. How does the electrical system, Uranus, interface with all of the multiple threads of existence that are happening right now? How many of you, like Jeffrey was talking about, when Uranus and Neptune were transiting through Aquarius, had this, we're going through the stage where you could be awake at 12 o'clock at night, for instance, because the pineal gland would be constantly stimulated through the frequencies of electricity that were coming through. And this was disturbing the melatonin, the sleep cycle. And how we live in a world right now where, say, for instance, 7 o'clock at night, you could be actually watching Netflix, and how that begins to change the context of sleep cycles and patterns, and how the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system has enough time to release the certain hormones to allow for rest and digest to take place versus active stimulation. So there's a tremendous amount of impact that is taking place for us as we interact with this new technology, and how, you know, we are learning at this point in time. And of course, we're the guinea pigs because we're the first line of interaction or interfacing with this new energy that's on the planet. When we come across the disturbance within our sleep cycles, when we come across the realization that a lot of the Wi-Fi signal that allows us to connect to the cloud or to our emails is actually toxic. You know, that there's a lot of EMF that comes off this. And it's not something new in the sense that, oh, it hasn't been around. It's just becoming more amplified. And so, you know, it's important for us to have this conversation and to ask ourselves the question, what in this new way can we begin to interact with technology that's something that's like really, really irritating my throat at the moment. Technology that's coming onto the planet, and how we can see it as an opportunity to innovate our way of living, but also at the same time to become aware of the non-physicalness that is taking place. And so what I mean by non-physicalness is that if you, pardon me for a second, oh my gosh. Okay. When you're, say, for instance, going out to the store and you purchase a physical product, right? Let's say you buy yourself a hamburger, right? And you get this you know, like a package that the food is in. That's something physical that you, when you finished your food, you take that package and you go throw it in a dustbin, right? We can physically relate to the sense of waste that accompanies material stuff, like plastic bags as an example. But how do we begin to form a relationship to things like EMF waste, as well as the radio frequencies that are existing that to the naked eye we can't see? And so a lot of this radioactive energy is available to us right now in a non-physical way, and we're not seeing an impact on our skin. We're not seeing an impact on the way that our brains are taking in consistently the radiation of being in a room where the computer is going 24/7, as an example. Like I was talking about the CPUs that would be available for computers to process high quality video editing, right? So we watch YouTube, and you think to yourself, every single person that's posted a video to YouTube has at some point needed a PC to edit that video, right? Most of the time, at least 88% of the time. And those CPUs are expressing or releasing certain radioactive energy, right? And where is that going into? Where is that going? So there's this conversation that we don't generally see or address because we're not actually seeing it in that sense. And that's one of the side effects that comes along with a non-physical, multidimensional, quantifiable reality that we're accessing, that in a good way is called the cloud, because everybody just uploads their videos to YouTube or uploads their content to Dropbox. You know, it's there, it's available. So where is the cloud? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's in a bunch of servers that's existing in Norway, Facebook as an example. So that's one of the conversations that this is not for us to just, you know, in this little small room over here, we're having a conversation. This is really more for those that are watching this and saying, okay, well, I'm really interested in engineering, and I feel that I could contribute if I orientate my values towards the key, let's say it like this, the key value in this whole entire process of evolutionary development is the color green, right, in the background. It's one of the reasons why I actually chose this background, because for today's topic of conversation, this is integrating the feminine principle within the context of this evolutionary development that we're taking place right now. And I touched on it the last Zoom meeting that we had, where we're beginning to recognize that it's really, really, really important and crucial that we need to develop sustainable or self-sustainable awareness and consciousness if we are to actually watch the next 50 years of our lives and the future of our children and the future generations exist on a planet where we're not essentially using the resources in a way that at some point just disappears. And it's a very deep conversation to have, because there's a lot of scare and fear propaganda that gets put onto the internet, that gets dictated through the funnel of network that sits in California, that's called Facebook and all the other media sites, where we can say, oh, we're running out of water. You just need to look around you to see that we have oceans. We have a plentiful amount of water. What our problem is that we're still thinking from the old cycle of Pluto through Capricorn, the old cycle of the way that we've related to humanness, and that is rooted in fossil fuel technology. That's rooted in this very predominant masculine approach, of conquer and assert, versus more of this understanding of interconnectedness with the earth. And for most of you for all of you actually that are sitting here listening to this, you know this already. It's nothing new. We're all standing here and looking at the world and looking at the leaders and saying there needs to be a change in this way of being. And it is occurring. It's not like we need to sort of do a bunch of random dances in traditional African clothes in order for us to have change take place. The thing that we need to do is just self-actualize the very nature of our own values that are rooted in this nurture, care, protection orientated sense of self and understanding that we have within ourselves. So the more that we can amplify the integration of this awareness within our own personal work, whether it be working as an astrologer, whether it be working as somebody that wants to become a philanthropist, whether it be somebody that is integrating and developing apps that support technology for human ability to become more sustainable, whatever it is, the inspiration in this video, at least, or the support that I'm wanting to offer, is the dialogue around how we can approach these situations and these evolutionary impulses that are available for us, and how we can embody them with regards to our own personal relationship to care, nurture, and protection towards the ecosystem. And so coming back to this thing about fear and propaganda, it's very, very important for us to also discern the propaganda around feeling guilty for your existence on Earth, and it's your fault that the world is the way that it is, right? Because we can internalize this and start creating a reality from this fear-based process that we're all going to die and Mother Nature is going to come after us. And it's very, when you watch nature documentaries and you watch certain people talk about the nature of climate change, there's a lot of human psychological fear that is being brought into what our solutions need to be, because of the ego feeling threatened by the existence, or the extermination of our existence. And I think one of the things that needs to be deeply understood when processing things like what does climate change mean for us is not only our own personal defense mechanisms towards the fear that is associated in ourselves around extinction or death, or the big thing, which is when you take your little self and you look at the world, if you had to try and help every single possible situation that exists out there, you would not have enough energy to exist yourself. It's simply not sustainable to try and save the world existentially. So the only way that the contributions to supporting a sustainable ecosystem that is rooted in the continuation of the human race in a way that doesn't at some point become fully aware of the overextension of masculine development, simply meaning that we've reached a point now in our process of understanding that we can build things. I mean, here in Sweden, for instance, you know, classic Saturn through Capricorn, I've watched them build two apartment complexes in next to no time. And I know, like, living in Sweden, for instance, that this country is not a country that just goes, oh, we'll just create something and it will just be half, like, it'll just be random. They really, really have some interesting rules and regulations about how they create stuff in a way that's very specific, very orientated. And so I know that what they're creating and what they build comes from detailed planning. And this is the advancement of this masculine principle. It's allowed us to actually exist within a world in which, when there is a storm that heads, you know, that comes in from the coastline here where I live, you know, we can sit and say we're going to be safe because the walls that we have around us and the heating system that we have available to us is going to, you know, actually make us feel as if when that weather system comes along and the trees are all blowing like that, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That looks really, really cool, but I wouldn't like to be out there. And God, I've got a place over here that makes me feel safe. So there's a pro to this. So we've reached a point in our collective in which now it becomes something that if we continue to go along that process, it doesn't become sustainable. You know, so even in my own personal work, there's so much insight, there's so much inspiration, there's so much I want to do to contribute to the value of the astrological community and you know, other platforms. But if I were to continue like approaching my work in the way that I have been up until this point in time, because it's grown so much, I would simply just run out. I would just be completely exhausted because I've got to look after my own body, right? Just as we all have to, you know. So it's wonderful that we self-actualize and we bring ourselves to a point where we can create a lot of content. But there's a lot of people out there that are just suffering from intense amounts of burnout because, like I said, the acceleration of the Uranus and Neptune through Aquarius has allowed us to have access to information whenever we want. So somebody that's living in Australia, for instance, can say, hey, SÍmON, I'd like to meet you at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then I talk to a client that lives in California, as an example, wakes up at 10 o'clock in the morning. But for me, it's 10 o'clock at night. So that whole entire day has just been, you know, sort of working with people from different parts of the world, and I have that access. But after a while, you just go like, oh, I don't actually have any physical energy left in myself because my sympathetic nervous system has run out because I haven't been able to have sleep cycles that we would normally have, say, for instance, 25, 30 years ago, right? So the point here is that there has to be a reworking around the acceleration of this principle of having timelines existing at any point and how we can become more sustainable in that process. And that time is now. So Uranus moves all into Taurus. And if you notice these symbols very, very carefully, I just thought it was just beautiful poetry to watch how Uranus goes into Taurus after a 7.5-year cycle through Aries. It initiates this like explosion of internet astrological community where we're all here and we're all doing the self-actualize. This is a new direction for us. We're breaking down the consensus way of rules and regulations. The Pluto in Virgo generation have an activation when Saturn goes through Scorpio because it goes over the Neptune. The Pluto in Libras, pardon me, coming back here again. The Pluto in Libras have Uranus squaring their Pluto. And so there's a whole lot of, change that takes place. And in this process, we see this like explosion, like I said, of the internet. But when Uranus moves into Taurus, we start to recognize that there has to be a sustainable way to like build a foundation to support this new direction. Because Aries just says, hey, let's, we've got this new direction. But Taurus says, okay, so how do we actually, lay the foundations for this to become sustainable? Pardon me. Oh my gosh. Okay. So Uranus goes back into Aries now, right? 29 degrees. The nodes shift into Cancer Capricorn. And while this is happening, Venus is retrograde. And This Venus retrograde process literally invites us to rework the context of our values and what we think and feel is supported. And it's going retrograde during the time where Uranus is in Taurus, and it's retrograde as well. So these two energies are consistently talking to each other, saying, okay, the nodes are going to shift into, Cancer Capricorn. And we know that Cancer Capricorn has a lot to do with the way that we establish the boundaries in our communities, how we establish the laws and regulations and what we feel safe within and the boundaries within the context of our society. So just before this Cancer Capricorn nodal axis happens, Venus and Uranus have this conversation, say, okay, this is sustainable, this is not. This is sustainable, this is not. And then, as I said, let me just pause for a second here, guys. Okay. As the nodes move into Cancer Capricorn, Uranus goes back at 29 degrees Aries, and it says, here we're going to rework the 7-year direction in a completely new way with new values. And part of these new values is going to be the context of how we become more sustainable and how do we integrate these new sustainable ways of relating to life. And we're going to reshape it. And Saturn goes through Capricorn, Pluto's in Capricorn. We know that whole entire Pluto through Capricorn story has been about dealing with the inherited karma, the inherited world that we live within relative to our choices of the past. We're talking about the repressed anger that comes through patriarchy. We've got all the repression of the feminine. All of that type of stuff just comes to the surface. And now the nodes move through Cancer Capricorn, and we have this opportunity to rework it, right? And I think it's beautiful that the Pluto and Virgos, who are the cleanup squad, essentially, are coming in, and their Pluto is now going to be trined by the South Node, right? And Uranus has been activating their Plutos through Aries, and now every single one of them for the next 7 years is going to have a Pluto-Uranus trine. And if you talk to a vast majority of the Pluto and Virgo souls, most of them are talking about reshaping the context of our lives in a way in which it goes from consumerism to having, wanting, to gratify our ego needs of importance relative to the void we feel with the lack of our sense of connection to source. And they're going to come along and say, okay, well, this is fantastic. We've got this new technology. We've got this new innovation. The masculine can support us in progression, but we need the feminine, right? We need the feminine. Okay. Oh my gosh, this whole entire video is going to be distorted from this irritation in my throat. You've got this little piece of hair that must be there, or something that's particles in the air. Anyway. Okay, let's try this again. So, as I said, the Pluto and Virgos are coming on, and their consciousness is saying, okay, we need to find a new way to sustain ourselves. We need to find a new way to be able to look at the nature of our reality and bring in the feminine principle, which is this care, which is this nurture, which is this ability to look at nature and ask ourselves, can we use our technology and mimic the context of how nature materializes itself and start creating material that is from that? So biodegradable consciousness. Like in Sweden, for instance, Jen was sharing with me that a lot of people would come and buy their groceries, and we actually have it in our home at this stage. We've got certain bags that are organically created that you put your fruit and vegetable in. So you go to the store, you purchase your fruits, and instead of taking the disposable packaging with you, you simply just use your bags to take home with yourself. And this is not something like really new. It's just that it's now becoming impregnated within the collective consciousness because we're shifting into a space in which we want more sustainability as the way that we live, because we see the impact that it's having on nature. We're becoming more sensitive. Neptune through Aquarius, Pluto through Capricorn, Pluto through Sagittarius. We're becoming more sensitive to our impact on nature and integrating more of the conscious sense of relatability to how our houses can be developed. So in the past, we created our houses based on this old paradigm way of thinking. And now we can start creating an ecosystem in which the way that we build our homes are developed to attract the sun and use the sun's electricity or the sun's energy to transform itself into electricity into our home. And this is what is beyond the horizon. This is the Pluto and Sagittariuses. That is what they're going to do for us. And there's a kind of split between the two. And my hope here is to inspire as many Pluto and Sagittariuses to come over to the non-shadow side of Aquarius, which is that unfortunately a lot of them will come into this lifetime with a lot of karma around disassociation, trauma, separation from nature, because they probably carry with them a lot of lifetimes in which religion was a big part of their lives and how they believed in a specific faith and they followed this and then realized there was just massacre all over the place. So a lot of them are coming with a disassociated state of being already karmically. And so technology would be a brilliant way to not actually feel their sensitivities, their highly sensitized spiritual selves, because really the world that they've inherited at this point in time is not so appealing. So it is our responsibility at this point, Pluto through Capricorn, not our guilt, not to make you feel guilty, but our responsibility to not only enact our own personal evolutionary intention, but the evolutionary intention that can support the next generation for them to come into a world in which they can orientate themselves and say, okay, here's what we have. This is what this is like. We obviously are inheriting a lot of repressed emotions and displaced anger. I mean, this is one of the reasons why there's a tremendous amount of shootings in the States and places all over the world that are not documented in the news to say where displaced anger is happening. But this is coming more prevalent to us because we're needing to become more aware of the shadow that we have. We're becoming aware of the shadow of our repressed anger and displaced emotion and unacknowledged emotional realities that comes along with this innovative technology to say, oh, okay, part of this process is helping us integrate healthily our sense of purpose that is not repressed because of structures and institutions and rules and regulations that supported a very controlling based one-size-fits-all thinking pattern. And again, it's really, really important to observe our own personal judgments. And even myself, as I talk to you about this today, our own personal judgments on saying that this was bad and this should not be, like really looking at patriarchy and saying, oh, that was a bad time. It was a time that was not conducive to healthy human emotional expression, yes. And it was a necessity that we had to go through. But now it's time for us to start seeing that the nature of the stars and the cosmos are moving into a different phase. And if we embody this new phase, the natural healing function of what we just experienced will naturally take over. And, there's a lot of astrologer women and men out there at the moment that are acknowledging that. And it's amazing. It's amazing to see that. But we've also got to be aware of our own shadow psychological and emotional complex that comes in with the hatred and displaced emotions we have towards lifetimes in which there has been rape and pillage and domination and, just complete and utter destruction. I highly encourage you to go and watch a TV show on Netflix that's called Teaching Latin to Morons. Okay. And it's a comedian that is Latin or Latino. And what he's done is he's taken his whole entire displaced anger and created a whole entire Netflix comedy, like stand-up act, in which he educates people not only in the context of and acknowledging the woundedness of our repressed anger, but he correlates it to his own repressed anger and his own culture. And I loved it so much because what he did was he said in his whole entire process was, I can't essentially express my anger in a way that's healthy because there is so much repression there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be creative and create comedy, so it's Jupiter and Sagittarius, in which I express deep truth, but in a way that lands in a soft way for us to acknowledge and accept. Because when we've got people that are not Uranus in Scorpio or Saturn in Scorpio, people want to embrace the truth. There's softer ways to embrace it, so not all of us carry the Uranus and Scorpio of like, here's the truth, it's black and white. People don't like to feel the intensity of what we have experienced through the patriarchal dynamics and era, because it is so incredibly emotionally intense. So creating or using art as a way to deliver deep truth in a way that helps us process these displaced angers is brilliant. And that's something that I really want to encourage everybody to do. That if you're an astrologer, or if you're somebody that just is wanting to self-express, the nodes moving through Aquarius, Leo for the last 18 months, if you're one of those people that has awoken to a place of wanting to give back or wanting to contribute, I implore you to find a creative outlet that is unique to yourself and infuse the process of helping the collective process these displaced emotions in a way to objectify the nature of it, so they can find a way to soften the defense mechanisms that are around the psyche, and so that we can embrace some of these deeper, darker truths that keep us from allowing us to not only accept our inner sense of emotional creativity, but the ability to also allow for deep layers of empathy, compassion, and wisdom to arise. Because it's in those states of pain we can acknowledge solutions around the suffering that has occurred, So this is something that is also deeply essential to looking beyond what Pluto in Sagittarius has brought us. This new way of relating to life with the context of being more right brain orientated. I mean, if you look at the world right now, and if you follow certain people on the internet that are helping us see the evolution of the way that we take in things, like I was talking about in the previous video, when you look at the internet that was created by the Pluto and Virgos, the internet was very much about like everything was in categories, and this was blog post number 1, blog post number 2, blog post number 3, and everything was in categories. And then you look at the Pluto and Libras, they come along and they're like, oh, we're going to integrate Facebook, we're going to integrate Twitter, everything is about sharing, and integration. And then the Pluto and Scorpios come along and say, is your website data protected? Have you got the little cookies at the bottom that tells every single person that if they come onto your site, that their data is secure? So each generation amplifies a evolutionary context for how we're developing this process. And the key here in what I'm sharing is that as we step into these new sort of dimensions, the Pluto and Sagittarius context and the world beyond this is looking at how we're moving a lot more from this very mental, left brain, logical sequencing of putting everything in a box to more visual stimulating, right? So like for myself as an example, the countless astrology books that I have, it's all written texture, okay? Like written. And I'm like, okay, well, this is fun and exciting, but I know that for me, I actually learn by listening and through visual stimulation. So what I did was I've just recently created a whole entire evolutionary school that can teach people astrology, but in a video format with illustrations. And it's something that is essentially a book, but it's in the way that we take in right now. And I know that it doesn't mean that everybody learns that way. It's just that we're moving into a stage where we actually take in with our sensory perception with this Pluto through Sagittarius dynamic. So we're opening up to this intuitive aspect of ourselves, this inner dimensional space that wants to be explored. And part of that exploration is understanding nature as in us, and that we are a reflection of it. So coming back to the whole theme of sustainable living and materializing and innovating technologies in a way where we can not only see that if we had to build houses, that we integrate, like I said, as a way to absorb the sunlight, And we're talking about the nature. I know that we've got one friend that's deeply into this process. She is currently, contributing to the way that eco-villages are being built, and how we can create sustainable materials that allow for a home to be built with using specific materials from the earth that keep it insulated, And this is beautiful because it begins to break down this process in which, for most of us living up until this point in time, we've needed to go out there and work for money and to come back and then pay our bills, and it's electricity bills, and it's this bill, and it's that bill, right? And so much of our time that we want to invest in expressing our creativity gets repressed because we are exhausted from having to do the work for other companies and other people that have, in a sense, had the capital to invest in their venture. And they've grown it to a point now where they can have all these wonderful things, but you're working for that company. And I'm not saying that working for a different company or for a company is a negative thing. If you love what you do, then that's amazing. But for most of the people that want to self-actualize, they're coming home at 7 o'clock at night because they're traveling to work and it's taking them 3 or 2 hours to get there. And it's not what they want to do. And they come home and they see everybody self-actualize and they can't do it. This innovative technology gives us the opportunity to begin seeing that as we move forward, right, certain, let's just talk about this in the sense of AI, can do mundane tasks like the dishwasher or the washing machine as an example, but an accelerated version of that gives people the freedom to be able to self-actualize and focus on the things that they want to do, which, there's a dormant engineer that has brilliant ideas that doesn't actualize that in themselves because they've had so much, there's so much apathy in their state of emotional relatability to life because of the inability to feel like they could actually self-actualize because they don't have time. They have to pay their bills, the stresses of this. So there's this other side, which through creating sustainable living is about also inventing sustainable AI technology that can do mundane things, that can support the maintenance of the body, as it were, and that we can actually step into a realm in which we can self-actualize and be creative in that and have more time to be innovative, because we know that creativity comes from space. And the more space that we have, the more creativity we can have because we're more relaxed and we're more activated in the parasympathetic nervous system, more susceptible to insights. Whereas when you're stressed, you're generally not as creative, in the way that things express themselves. So there's that whole entire paradigm of sustainable living through looking at the way that we're going to reform houses. And, the Pluto in Sagittarius is already coming onto the planet, and this is what their orientation is. That's what I was wanting to say earlier about how, wanting to inspire the Pluto and Sagittarius that do watch this to say, hey, I'm really interested in engineering, and I'm really super excited about what nanotechnology does and how we can use nanotechnology or 3D printing to explore deeper dimensions of the material plane and the mineral kingdom, and how we can understand to live in harmony with the nature, and how living in harmony, we can still be progressive while not essentially taking from it and not creating the recycle state. Like in Sweden, for instance, a lot of people right now, I don't know if it is in the States, I'm sure there is, because, in some areas there is progressiveness, and the rest of the world. But here, most places that I go to that are like shopping mall, for example, have got at least 5 or 6 electricity or electrical car charging ports, and it's freely available. So it's like if you had to go out there into the car place right now and say, hey, I'd like to buy this Nissan Leaf, and purchase it, and I drive down to the gas station, or I drive down to the place that you buy some of your shopping, there's actually ports that can charge it, and in your home. So there's so much of this kind of progressive thinking here that it's not something that's out of our reach. It's not something that is unavailable to us, that is potentially there. It's available, it's here. We just need to become more able to integrate that within ourselves and embody that process as an active way of thinking, so that when the Pluto and Sagittarius come onto the planet and they become more sort of inspired by what gives them purpose, they will have the leaders, which are you, that are sitting here right now, standing up and saying, this is the way. Because that's what I was talking about with the Pluto and Virgos. Right now, this is your activation time. The planetary energies are aligning for you to be activated, to self-actualize through your consciousness. You are the people that will stand up and say, hey, Pluto and Sagittarius generation, we want to show you what it looks like to come into a world in which we will lay the foundation, and you become, you see it as sustainable. You take your innovative technologies and you integrate it. And not forgetting the Pluto and Scorpios, who actually have their Uranus and Neptune in Capricorn as well. You know, to actually have that determinate awareness to say, we want to rejuvenate. We want to structure the whole entire way in which our society operates, that is infused with this collective self-sustainable way of thinking. And your polarity point, the Pluto and Scorpio's polarity point, is in Taurus. You know, so as Uranus begins to move through Taurus, it's going to activate all of your Plutos, you know, that opposition. So you're going to feel this absolute need to understand why, when you came onto the planet, so many of you came on learning how to become self-sustainable, and how you couldn't actually integrate yourself into the current structures of the world right now because it didn't make sense to you. Because in your DNA, you've already coded in the fact that you're going to establish the new form. You're going to integrate yourself into a new society that's all about self-orientation to self-sustainability and preserving. You know, Pluto through Scorpio, its polarity point Taurus, Uranus through Taurus. How do we preserve? And it's this process right now. This is where we are. We're at the forefront of this whole entire realm that gives us the opportunity to embody it, so that we can lay the foundation and be the heroes for the Pluto and Scorpio, the Pluto and Sagittarius, to say, yes, my inspiration is I am that engineer, or I am that artist, or I am that comic. And my contribution to healing the world in a very sort of, you know, Venus and Mars balsamic phase conjunction, utopian way, you know, as I have to do that, is to bring healing in the different forms, for us to open ourselves up to processing these deeper layers of displaced anger that we have towards the violations of natural law. And when we look at the current world right now, and we see the intense disassociated state with, you know, things like American politics as an example, and the apathy that has plagued America, that now is being trying to be like, there's this new whole entire process. I've seen it all over my newsfeed, where so many people are saying, go out and vote, as an example. It's not about really the voting thing as much as the process of standing up and taking charge and integrating and coming back and saying, hey, I want to participate in the healing process. And so it's this participation that also takes place, and the energies are here to support it. It's not something that we have to sit down and go, okay, here's my crystal ball, I've got to figure this out. It's like, no, just be in alignment with the sensitivity of this process. Allow your own natural DNA to be the guidepost. You know, we all have this within ourselves right now. That's why I'd be sitting here saying, yeah, okay, this makes sense. So my role really in this conversation is to just give that sense of hope, that sense of, you know what, today I'm really going to think in a way that's sustainable. And maybe I'm going to look for a post, or create some comedy, you know, for somebody to process some of their states of apathy, you know, whatever it is, but to live in that state and consistently keep on creating that motivation that supports the ongoing process of what those symbols were really trying to represent to us. Okay. So that's me and my little speech today. I really hope that in some way, shape, or form that was supportive or valuable. And I appreciate the time that you have taken to listen to this. And so, like Linda was saying, there's about 10 minutes left. So if anybody's got some questions or something to share, I'd be happy to respond to while I quench my thirst.
Yes, SΥmონ, thank you for that. The mutation of the brain sound, you know, through our interaction with technology, you know, computer screens and things like that, it just sounds very unhealthy. I mean, it doesn't sound good to me. What do you think?
It's like both, to be honest, because I really appreciate you bringing this up, because this was more about the toxicity of the unseen, um, EMFs that materialize. So like my screen at the moment, okay, I don't know if many of you have it. I encourage you to go and get it. It's a program called Flux. So if you just type in FLUX, it's and you'll see it on your iPhones at the moment, or your Macs. Apple have already integrated, where it's called night shift. And what it does is it changes the screen's brightness to something that's more subtle as the time of the day goes below, right? Or gets darker. And so this was integrated from two Pluto in Libras that were spending a lot of time interfacing with the screens and noticing at 12 o'clock at night, they were still like, oh, my pineal gland is still stimulated, because the screen and the blue screen, it's called the blue screen, is literally stimulating your eyesight to the point where you can't actually relax. So this technology called Flux, as well as what you see on Apple now, which is called Night Shift, is something that allows us to interact with the screen at, like, as you can see over here, the color of my face is a little bit more orange tinted. And it's because the globe that I have available to me is specifically attuned to the current time that we're in right now. So it's completely pitch black right now. And so my screen has got Flux on it. It changes the whole entire way that the blue screen, in other words, the blue light behind it, is completely disengaged. So when my eyes are interacting with the screen, there's not much strain. I can actually go to sleep if I was working on my computer, say, for instance, on a video for something, at 9 o'clock at night. I would not be still wide awake at 10 because the blue screen was consistently stimulating my eyes. It wouldn't have that effect, just as with the light over there. So the reason why I say this is a great question, because up until this point, like I said, we're guinea pigs to this new energy. The inspiration that came from these dialogues that I'm having, or monologues that I'm having at the moment with you, is that I saw that we've only been interfacing this for the last 18 years. So we're clueless as to what this new technology does for us and what screen time does for us, and it is affecting the way our brains work. But when you go and do the research into how the nervous system is interfacing with, say, for instance, virtual reality, it is opening different dimensions of the brain that would not be stimulated because we weren't perceiving reality in a three-dimensional way. So it's both, it's the polarity of being responsible to not expose yourself to too much screen time, and getting out in nature and interacting with it in a way where you could feel the senses and your body is still interfacing with it, because the body is still old. It's still sort of the past. So it does need that care and nurture. But going forward into the future, we will, like with Flux, as an example, it's already integrated into the internet. You can go and download it and then use it. And you'll notice that blue light doesn't affect you as much. So what comes out of the shadow, innovation must take place. And like I said, there are certain, we're guinea pigs to it. So coming back to the nature of the brain itself and how it's being developed, there are pros and cons. And I think that it's a progressive way of interfacing. At some point, we will become super aware. I know that when you look at professional gamers, for instance, they've got these glasses that have got orange lenses, because they're consistently staring at a screen, because professional online PC gaming is something that's real now. So for them, interfacing with the screen, that is obviously affecting them. But like I said, these glasses are now available, and it takes the strain off it. And we will, through somebody that says, oh, I've unfortunately had this injury due to excessive use of this, somebody will come along and say, okay, well, we've got to fix it. So it's taking the good with the bad, or the bad with the good,
Thanks, SΥmონ. So we have time for one more question. Liv, please go ahead. Okay, looks like her microphone is not on, so I'll read it from the chat box. With this nodal shift, do you believe this shift Do you believe this will shift in the willingness in the younger ones to actualize desire and experience of self?
Absolutely. I have complete faith that as much as the world is, I mean, as much as what you see in the world is funneled through what Facebook wants you to see, and it looks like it's a complete state of apathy, there are tremendous amounts of people that are not visible, that are inspirational, that are consistently wanting to actualize conscious thinking and are creating content that is available to be accessed. And I think that it goes beyond our ego sense of will it or will not work. I believe that there are a lot of people out there that have got a unique mission within themselves that needs to just be awoken by somebody. That's why I'm sitting here today saying this, because if this just activates 2 or 3 people after watching this video, and that then has another, that, you know, that talks to another 4 or 5 people, I know that the ripple effect will take place because I understand the Uranian field. And so it's just about changing 1 or 2 people and having that then affect other people in that way, which it will happen. So all it is about, and this is the core message here, is the embodiment of what is inspirational for you and what you know to be true, and what is your contribution. And that's the way that you contribute to the change. And by doing that, trusting in the process of somebody coming along and meeting that frequency that needs to be sort of inspired, or the spirit to be coming out of them. And with the nodal shift at this point in time, in the context of reality, in the context of the Pluto and Scorpios on the planet right now, yeah, I have faith. Yes, absolutely. And if I'm the one that's holding that flag, then so be it. You know?
Great, SΥmონ. Thank you so much. And thanks to Liv for your question. Would you all please thank SΥmON Vorster, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you next time, SΥmON. Bye for now.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, SΥmON.
Thank you.
Thank you, SΥmON.
Thanks, SΥmON.
Thanks, SΥmON.
Brilliant.
Very good.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
You too.